Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, members of the clergy, distinguished guests, selectmen of the town of North Andover, and all our veterans. It's a great honor to be asked to be part of the rededication of this World War I monument, first dedicated by another Nathaniel Stevens almost 100 years ago. My family joins me in expressing our gratitude that North Andover, a town we love so much, has asked us to be part of this centennial ceremony. Today we recall the universal rejoicing at the armistice on the 11th hour, on the 11th day, on the 11th month of 1918. After all the slaughter and suffering of the war that started in the summer of 1914 after the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand of Austria, the United States entered the war in 1917. Nearly 5 million Americans answered the call to serve, and when they came home, they became part of the great solidarity among all veterans who have seen the face of war, never forgetting those who did not come home. Each name on our monument has a story behind it. On the far right column, you will find the name of my cousin, Caroline Stevens. Caroline served in Toul, France, in a hospital very close to the front. Toul was an ancient city with great medieval cathedral. By 1918, Toul was a medical hub for the U.S. Army, with evacuation hospitals, base hospitals, neurological, gas, and contagious disease units. It was also the home of 45 units of the Army Air Service, and an area from which 2 large offensives were launched during the last 8 weeks of the war. Caroline was immersed in frontline casualties, both civilian and military. At the same time, the man who would later become Caroline's husband was serving as an artillery scout. Young Horatio Rogers managed to keep a small red leather vest pocket diary given to him by his father, full of cryptic scribbles about his daily life at the front. These scribbled notes became the source of his book called The Diary of an Artillery Scout, published by him nearly 60 years after he came home. On the flyleaf of the diary is written his name, rank, battery, regiment, division, and brigade, the American Expeditionary Force. His division was the famous 26th Yankee Division. About his diary, he also wrote, "At the back are 10 pages full of irregular words, spotted with rain, written on horseback, in shell holes, dugouts, haylofts, troop trains, camions, and ships. These are the landmarks for what follows." What follows is a faithful, nearly day-by-day account of one corporal's war. The guns, the trenches, the marches, the rain, the mud, the lice called cooties, and the rats. For each chapter heading in his book, Rogers reproduces his diary's daily scribbled phrases. There we read, "Shell fire and gas. Our first man killed. A gun crew wiped out. I get gassed. A battle against mud. Route marking at night. War in the open. More losses. Into the enemy's country. Scenes around Croix Rouge Farm. Some drivers killed. Exhaustion. Hiding in the woods. Shrapnel fire. Cold weather. Fed up with the war. The breaking point. Disaster. 7 days of torment. And then, miraculously, the armistice. Finally, the armistice. In an entry for November 1918, he says, "I walked over to battalion headquarters where I found that the attack was called off. On my way back, I yelled the good news as soon as I came in sight of the men in the gun pits. The cannoneers swarmed out and danced around, yelling with joy, on November 11th. Ritchie was at the switchboard when a call came through from battalion to suspend fire at 10:59, as an armistice was to go into effect at 11. At 11, all sounds of firing stopped. A few minutes later, we heard church bells ringing at Verdun. At last, along the front, not guns but church bells were heard. Some months later, Horatio Rogers came home on a troop ship, with bands playing and all the whistles in Boston Harbor screeching. The Agamemnon nosed up to Commonwealth Pier and made fast. Through all the tumult of cheering and bands, I thought of the windrows of American dead in the wheat fields of Croix Rouge Farm, and I thought of their families back at home. And then it was over. 2 weeks later, we had a parade down Commonwealth Avenue, and 4 days after that, we were mustered out of the service. I turned away from the adjutant's office with my discharge paper in my hand and found my father standing in the road behind me. Horatio Rogers resumed his interrupted education, becoming a physician. After he and Caroline Stevens married, they returned to North Andover, where they lived out their lives in a town beloved by both of them. In the preface to his book, Horatio Rogers said that of all the things he found in his attic so many years after the war, the little red leather vest pocket diary became for him like the most important thing people would dash into a burning house to save. In 1922, when our town's monument was dedicated, the audience could read the 340 names who came home and the names of 3 who did not. Today, standing where they stood, we too can read those names, but with one great difference. The audience then was reading not just names of historical interest, but their own names. They are gone now, but once they were young, and they were ours. And today we salute them. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.